So may I now call upon Judge Sharon Venne to take the floor and to direct the jury. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been struck today by what happened in India and then Kenya and then also in the Congo. And looking at what are the root causes of what has gone on here is that if you go back to the beginning of colonization, because we're not in a process of decolonization yet, we're still being colonized. And this court is authorized to hear complaints about past, present, and acts having impacts on the future generations. And I'm reading 4.2 on the Intergenerational Climate Crimes. If you look at that section, and what is the real root of what's happening here is because the colonization process that originally started with the Europeans going into the territories of the people that live there, that they have unilaterally decided that the underlying title to the lands belonged to them and not to the original people. And because of that, they feel that they can empower a corporation to be able to go in and use that land without the consent of the people, which is what is continuing. So if you look at that process and you look at the legal entity that's defined in 2.4, and you just go over to 2.4, it says legal entities are legal artifacts established by a group of persons with authority to do so for the purposes of limiting environmental, social, and legal liabilities, which is what the colonial process did. The European process, created the environment to allow these companies to exist. And they empowered those companies. And so when they allowed, and I use the words allowed, the original peoples, or not the original peoples, but the entity they created, a state entity, which is a Western creation, they gave them all of the baggage and all of the materials to continue the process of colonization, which is what is going on here, because every one of the witnesses today talked about coming up against, quote unquote, the legal system of the state, which was the legal system of the state that was imposed on them by colonization. And so colonization is the ground in which these companies continue to promote their activities using a system that they put in place for these companies. So they actually never decolonized at all. So we're still in the colonial period. So I think what we have to come to grips is that the states that have been created on top of these lands have promoted and continue to promote the system of colonization of their own people. And so the people are being colonized not only by the present state that's been created, but also the companies that are emboldened by this state system to destroy the lands which the people are saying that they really need, the territories they really need to exist. So one of the recommendations that could potentially come out of this is that we do really need a decolonization process. Not the way that it's been dealt with, because they have controlled it, but to have a real decolonization of the peoples who are the original landowners that says, what do we want done on our land? Because this is our land. We are the ones that were given obligations, responsibility for this territory. And these other entities came along and have been trying to control that. So we need to look at that and how we can make a suggestion about how that could be undertaken. And if you are going to have some kind of process into the future. Otherwise, what's happening now, if you legitimate these companies and allow them to continue there is no future, I believe every witness that we heard today said the same thing. If we don't get back our territory, we have no future. So past crimes of the colonization, the present crimes of colonization is going to lead to no future. So I think that's, you know, when we look at this, our obligation under this, under what we're working under now, the Intergenerational Climate Crimes Act, this is what really runs the thread through the whole thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for that. May I now call upon Nicholas Hildyard to give his directions.
Well, I wholly endorse what Sharon has just said. I think this is really critical. I mean, we shouldn't be afraid of history. We have to understand history. In fact, you can't understand where we're going without understanding the past. And the colonial history is fundamental to the problems that we face and which are on trial today. And I think it's absolutely right, this focus on, I think someone said, you know, we cannot have a sustainable future. Our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren will not survive, will not have a future if we have the corporation in its current form. And one of the things that struck me today, with some of the charts that have been going up and so on, is the way that companies, with the active connivance of states and the legislation that states put in place, not least legalized corrupt arrangements, is all about avoiding responsibility, accountability. I mean, we all know how this spider web of companies that are set up all over the world are used to evade taxes. And that's well documented, and I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with this from, you know, documentaries on television and so on about tax evasion here in the Netherlands. But I think what comes across for me is a way that it's also used to avoid legal accountability. I mean, it is to me absolutely shocking that the chair of the CEO of a company based here in the Netherlands, Unilever, can seriously be expected to be taken seriously by anyone in saying that when a company, a subsidiary in India effectively pours mercury into the local environment, into local streams, that it's nothing to do with me, Gov. I mean, it's not as if Unilever isn't receiving, Unilever here in the Netherlands isn't receiving all the profits. Why is it here in the Netherlands? Precisely so it can receive all the profits. And then to say, well, we're just a holding company, we've got nothing to do, we don't know what's going on in India or whatever. This is to my mind, absolutely criminal, and certainly criminal under this particular statute. I mean, it's like me going to India on holiday and saying, well, I'm a legal person in the UK and I have certain legal responsibilities in the UK, but if I go to India on holiday, I'm a different legal person. I'm a Nicholas Hildyard with an Indian visa. And if I then went and scattered poison all over, or gave children poison and then returned to London, and then the Indian authorities or the parents of the children said, I want to prosecute you. I said, no, it's not me. You can't prosecute me because it wasn't me that did it. It was Nicholas Hildyard with an Indian visa who did it. I mean, this is absurd. And it's only possible because we have allowed, in our name, but without much discussion with any of us, companies to be given legal personality. And it's legal personality that gives them more rights than you or I or anyone else around the world enjoy as individuals. They can go to any country and set up just like that. It takes about 5 minutes to set up a company in a tax haven. There's no scrutiny. You try and move to another country and say, I want to live there and operate there. You'll have visa requirements. You'll have requirements about how much money you're going to invest, etc., to get a golden visa, etc., etc. They have more rights than us, and only because we have granted them legal personality. So those are two things that come to me from today.
Thank you for those observations and for the remarks, and may I now call upon Rasigan.
So, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone, and I also align myself with my colleagues that have presented earlier. You know, I'm quite struck from what we heard from this morning. You know, when we were told, well, we're at least better than others. You know, and I think that this is something that's bothered me throughout. How do we understand this? We are better than others, therefore it's acceptable. You know, there was a newsletter masthead that we were shown earlier. And at the bottom of the masthead it read, for the benefit of shareholders, customers, staff. I hope we pay attention to that order in which the benefits or beneficiaries were listed. Yeah? That's from what becomes Unilever. And that was in 1930, but that's what it said. Yeah. Now, when we listen to that, it's obvious that the primary beneficiary is the shareholder. It's put forward in that form. But for the shareholder to realize any value, there's a customer that's involved. I kind of think the only entity in those three words that's generating the value, the staff, the actual workers, are the last mentioned. And why are they mentioned in that way? Because they're also the source of the profit that then is returned to shareholders. Yeah? I'm sure you realized when we saw the clip, notwithstanding the difficulties in the transmission, the worker in the Congo had a wage slip for $26 take-home pay in a month. Well, we could call 26 days a month. In work we are doing with the US labor movement, the demand for 2022 is $26.94 an hour. These are two human beings separated by jurisdictions. So, as we work through a lot of these issues, there's some very basic, and it's so important, as the previous judges have mentioned, that we humanize and bring some of these facts away from aggregates, big charts, etc., to a reality that we can experience and also somehow take agency back over. The notion was raised around Dutch pride, yeah, in an institutional form. It has a shape, it has shareholders. Yeah. But if this is in the national consciousness, where is the national conscience that should follow it? Now, we can't be conscious of something and not be conscientious about it. So I really want to encourage that we pay attention to that, because this is spoken in our names. Yeah? A second aspect, I only have three aspects to rest. Yeah? A second aspect, and this is also critical because it binds many of what we've seen both yesterday and today together. You know, knowledge advances. Our very engagement is pushing knowledge forward. Because knowledge is a social process. Yeah? It's not just lab results and things like that. But what we can clearly see across all three cases that were presented is this huge chasm between the science that's being generated and the society itself. Yeah. In the Netherlands, we have a huge amount of knowledge institutions. Yeah? There's a huge public investment in research and development. It's not our object, so I won't bore you with the statistics around it. But it is a huge amount of money. But what is the object of that research and development? Because we have an uneven distribution of the scientific and technological capacities, capabilities, and competences. Yeah? In terms of the countries noted as developing or emerging, there's a paucity of these skills. Yeah? In the investments where countries have huge amounts devoted to public R&D, it's for the benefit of the corporations. Yeah? So where is the socially relevant? When people talking about cleaning up mercury poisoning, I think it was raised, is it even possible? Should this not be an object? If you were conscious of the firm, the corporation that created the harm, that we would invest the necessary resources to redress that harm. Because if we don't invest in creating that knowledge, we continue and perpetuate it. Yeah? And the cycle continues. In July this year, South Africa exploded. Yeah? During the riots, we lost 350 fellow South Africans. In the process of the riots, a factory was burnt down. This factory is an Indian firm that had located a chemical business that's no longer tolerated in India into South Africa. And this has polluted the rivers along the KwaZulu-Natal coast. You saw dead fish being washed up. So we are continuing. We are part of this process that's allowing itself to be reproduced. And that's why the third point, I think, as you make your decision about this, to also bear in mind. We're in the third decade of the 21st century, and it's a common era. And is being better than others good enough for us now? I would suggest to you it's hugely insufficient if we want a future, as is being raised. We can recognize clearly in what's being presented that the past was a disaster. For most in the world today, the present is a catastrophe. And if we look ahead, just extending what we've seen today, I'm sorry, colleagues, friends, jurors, however we want to call ourselves, fellow human beings, it's extinction in front of us. Yeah. So I think really the time is now to act against this. We recognize the world is combined, notwithstanding all those lines we draw there, yeah? But it is extremely uneven. Notwithstanding that it's combined and uneven, it is common. It's the only place we have. There's no spaceships arriving to take us off the planet. We have to fix it. And if we know who is causing the harm, we should not allow that harm to be perpetuated and continued. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your reflections. And I will now just share some of my thoughts on today's hearings and what I think is important for you to consider. I want to begin with some thoughts on the first witness presentation that we saw about Kodaikanal in India. And we saw how even a small drop of mercury, when it gets into the food chain, the whole fish population is impacted with a very small drop. And we saw that there were really thousands of tons of mercury being discharged into the environment. And we often talk about sustainable development or doing things in sustainability or sustainable ways. But the question that I want to pose to you is, anything we do on a large global scale, can it be sustainable? Palm oil has been produced by people where the palm is their homeland, where it grows in their homeland, and people have used it for centuries. They never destroyed the palm groves. They never destroyed anything. It was in their nature, and they used their oil that was available in their nature, and others in other natures used whatever was available. In my part of the world, we have coconut palms and we use coconut oil. But when you start producing those things for this global market, and for a global market where one part of the world consumes most of what is produced in 2/3 of the world, because we live in a world where 1/3 of the world consumes what 2/3 of the world produces, then the fundamental question is, can large-scale production ever be sustainable? And that question links up to the first one about land and colonization, because the whole colonial process was to really bring the wealth from one part of the world and to sort of keep it in another part of the world, and that was a question. But very related to that and very important question under the Intergenerational Climate Crimes Act is the question about how is large-scale production and consumption possible? What makes it possible? And at the core of that, it seems to me, is a legal structure that creates an artificial person and says that this artificial person can roam the world without any barriers and can take whatever they want from anywhere they want. Yeah? Because imagine yourself, as a human being, how much coconut will you consume? Yeah? Even if you were a voracious, I'm saying coconut because it comes from my land, right? But and you can say that for palm oil, you can say that for anything. But when you come to a corporation or a legal person, then there is indefinite amounts of consumption that is possible. There is no finite limit to how much can be consumed. All they need to do is have another advertising strategy so that you can then be persuaded to consume some other product instead of margarine or whatever it is. So my fundamental question is, if large-scale production is unsustainable, and if it is a law that makes large-scale production possible, and the law includes corporate personality and empire building, state, which we saw today in every single presentation that came about. Yeah? So the empire and the corporate personality, these two are inextricably tied. One cannot live without the other, and both together make large-scale expropriation of land, of people, of resources possible. So if that is the question, then we have to ask what sustainability means and whether the way we talk about sustainability is at all sustainable. So that was my first observation. So this was about scale and law. My second observation is about place and people. So our legal system or the legal system under which we live, and that is not the legal system in this court, because this court follows a different legal system, but in the legal system outside this court, we have this assumption, which is based on a fiction, and it is called legal fiction, that says that 10 people can come together, establish a company, and then that becomes a person. And that person is then equal to all of us. And that is the fiction on which the whole society operates. So my question is, if that other person, the corporate person, can go around the world, evict people, natural persons, take land, establish whatever production or whatever it is that they want to establish, then where do those people stand? To be human, to be an elephant, a lion, a tiger, whatever, you need a ground to stand on. Where will you stand? If that land is taken away, where do people stand? Yeah? And that is something that you need to ask. In particular, need to ask because, at least in this part of the world, immigration is becoming a big crisis issue. But if people are driven out of their land, continue to be driven for hundreds of years, where do they stand? Because somewhere they need some place to stand. Yeah? So that is about physical existence. The third thing that I want to ask you to think about when you make your decision is about legal personality and people's conceptual world. When these corporations went to Kenya or went to India or went to Congo, yeah, and they represented themselves as a person, they went to communities and societies where only natural beings were parts of communities. So they could understand an elephant in my area as being part of our communities. We have grown up with elephants and they are part of the scenery, so to speak. Yeah? So we accept that they are part of the community. We accept that snakes are part of our community because they are part of whoever we are. And as you saw in the first film, the Sholakili is very much part of the community because it makes such a racket and we wake up to that, you know, bird call and sound. So in that context, how possible is it that a clan or a tribe or any other form of community organization, villagers, would have understood this concept that there can be an abstract person who can't be seen, who you can't talk to, who does not have an elder, who does not have a leader, and this person comes and says, I'm a person. And they talk to the general manager or the CEO and say, you are responsible. And the general manager says, no, I'm not responsible because I'm only an employee. But there is this other person called Unilever, and this person does these terrible things. I'm not nothing. He may even resign and go. And some other general manager will come. And the company will say, oh, but we are still the company, right? You are bound by all the laws. Imagine how extraordinary this must sound to most people around the world, that, you know, that there is this invisible person who can't be seen, nobody is responsible for it, yeah? Everybody is there, comes and goes. One day one is a general manager, next day another person comes as a general manager, but generally nobody is responsible. So when we talk about these people have signed a lease agreement, these people have signed a contract, you have to ask yourself this question, you know, what are we talking about as two sides, if there is two sides to it? There is one artificial person, invisible, you know, you can't, and there is this other, a clan, a tribe, a community where there are real people, and you hold them to their contract. And my last thing, I want to again come back to question of decision making. Any judgment or any decision, I think Rasigan talked about knowledge, is a social thing. Social beings make decisions, make judgments. And these are what we call conscience, is a human attribute. It's an attribute of being human that we have something called conscience. All those three witnesses came here today because they saw all of you as human and therefore assume that there is something called a conscience, and a conscience is something that is created or born inside us because we are members of a collective society. you know, without society, there is no development of a conscience. The sense of what is right, what is wrong comes because we are human. Now you have a legal person, and you say that this legal person has a conscience. Does it? I mean, would anybody with a conscience do what happened to Kodaikanal, or what happened to the people of Kericho, and what happened in Congo and things like that? So when we attribute human rights to corporations, when we attribute human qualities to these things, can we even say that these corporations can have a conscience when they are not human? So those are some of those things that we need to think about, and I say this because I know that there is a lot of discussion on corporate social responsibilities and so on. So can a corporation even have a conscience if conscience is a human attribute? So with those remarks, I will just close my comments, and we come to the most important, I think, part of today's proceedings, which is, you will now, I call upon all of you to reflect on everything that has been said, and then to vote. You have heard evidence on Unilever from 3 witnesses. You have heard about the complicity of the state from 3 witnesses. And you have heard the summing up and directions from the judges here today. And so I now ask you, those of you who have heard the witness, reflected on it, and have concluded that Unilever and Netherlands, the state of Netherlands, are guilty, please raise your hands. Those who say they are not guilty. Not guilty. Those abstaining, could you please put your hands up? 1 abstention, any more? 2 abstentions, 3, 4 abstentions, 5. Okay. Thank you very much. That gives us a clear sense. 5 abstentions, majority voting guilty. What we will now do, the judges will take away your thoughts on this, your contributions to the discussion, as well as what the witnesses have said, and will write up a final concluding judgment, which will be available in due course.